Christmas Carol, adapted from the great works of Eloise Johnson, who adapted her version from Charles Dickens. Mrs. Johnson took Charles Dickens' story, A Christmas Carol, and adapted the novel into a wonderful musical play designed for the capabilities of the students at Blandford School. Mrs. Johnson was one of the very first music teachers and worked alongside Mrs. Adele Beckman and Mr. Rick Gillette for many years to build the tradition of performing A Christmas Carol. Mrs. Johnson also served as past president of the St. Cecilia Music Society. This gift that Mrs. Johnson left for the Blandford School program and students, Beeps, is a treasure that we will always enjoy. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson.
The original author of A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens, came from a family of 8 children and lived most of his life in London. His childhood was dismal and food was often scarce. In fact, his family was so penniless that poor Charles worked in a shoe factory when he was our age, 11 and 12. His memories of this job was so bad he seldom spoke of it. School was a place he attended off and on. Actually, his mother didn't like when he did attend school, because that meant the family was not able to have the money he would have earned. Needless to say, he never finished school.
Charles Dickens had such abundant energy that he often took long walks. He came to know the streets and alleys of London better than any other person of his time. As a result, he based his stories on what he saw around him. He often included his own family as his characters. In the 1840s, when he was desperate for money during the holidays, he wrote Christmas stories. One of these was A Christmas Carol.
Marley was dead as a doornail. He died 7 years ago on this very night, on Christmas Eve. Scrooge and Marley were partners at the counting house for many years. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name, and it still stood above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley.
Scrooge was a tight-fisted, squeezing, wrenching, grasping old sinner. Scrooge was hard and sharp as flint, as well as secret and solitary, like an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, knitted his pointed nose, and shriveled his cheeks. The unsympathetic Scrooge had a stiffened gait. With his wiry chin and thin blue lips, he spoke with a grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head.
As Scrooge walked about the town on his way to the counting house, no one ever stopped him with a gladsome "How are you?" No beggars implored him, nor children asked him what o'clock it was. Even the blind man's dog would appear to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts. This was the very thing Scrooge liked, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance.
Old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house on this Christmas Eve. His door was open so that he could keep his eye upon Bob Cratchit. The eccentric Scrooge, always distrustful, the coals would spite him, fog poured in through every chink and keyhole. Scrooge had a small lump of coal in his fire, and left his clerk to warm himself with just a candle.
The bell above the counting house doorway sounded as Scrooge's nephew came in. How fitting, Scrooge thought as Fred came in from the cold streets.
Ding-a-ling.
Merry Christmas, Uncle.
Ah, humbug.
Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure.
I do. What right have you to be merry? You're poor enough. Every idiot who goes around with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart.
Uncle, What right have you to be dismal? You're rich enough. I've always thought of Christmas time as a good time, a kind, forgiving time. The only time I know when men and women seem to open their hearts. God bless it.
Ah, humbug.
I was hoping you would come for dinner tonight.
Bah, humbug.
Merry Christmas, Uncle, and a Happy New Year.
Bah, humbug.
Instead of taking up his nephew on the invitation for dinner, Scrooge closed up the counting house for the evening and went to the tavern for a dinner by himself, just as he liked it, alone. To help pass the time along, Scrooge read all the newspapers and studied his banker's book. Now it was time to go home, to bed.
It was a frosty, cloudy night, making the yard so dark. Even though Scrooge knew its every stone, he had to grope with his hands. Feeling his way, Scrooge's hands came to the large knocker on the door. Putting his hands into his pocket and fumbling to put his key into the lock of the door, Scrooge's eyes glanced at the large knocker on the door, and through the misty air saw in that knocker, not a knocker, but Marley's face.
Marley's face! Scrooge was not a man to be normally frightened, but he jumped back. He looked up again and saw that it was just a knocker. Shaking the vision off, he put his hand on the key, turned it sturdily, and walked through. Scrooge fastened the door tightly behind him.
With candle in hand, Scrooge went up the stairs, but before shutting his heavy door, he walked through his room to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of Marley's face to do that. Quite satisfied that all was right, Scrooge closed the door, locking himself in. In fact, he double-locked himself in, which was not his ordinary custom. Thus secured against any surprises, he dressed himself for bed and sat down before his fire.
Scrooge drew up his chair to sit a bit closer to the low fire, reaching out towards the flames and rubbing his hands to feel the least sensation of warmth for them. Scrooge stared into and lost himself in the dancing flames. Yet that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came up and swallowed the fire.
Bah, humbug, said Scrooge, startled, shaking off Marley's face for a second time. Scrooge leaned back in his chair. His glance came to a final rest upon a bell, which, as he looked, began to swing. Soon it rang out loudly, as did every bell in the house.
The bells ceased and were followed by a clanking noise, deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain. In the depths of the cellar, Scrooge could hear the deepening steps becoming louder and louder. Up, up, up the steps towards his bedroom door. The steps passed through the heavy door and into the room. Before Scrooge's eyes was Marley's ghost.
How now? What do you want with me?
Much.
Who are you? Who are you?
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
Mercy, why do you trouble me? Why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they trouble me?
It is required of every man that his spirit should walk among his fellow men. If that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death, doomed to wander through the world and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness.
You are fettered. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house, and a weary journey lies before me. At this time of year I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds with eyes turned down and never raise them to that blessed star? Were there no poor homes to which its light might have conducted me? Hear me! My time is nearly gone.
You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Look to see me no more, but for your own sake, remember.
It was dark when Scrooge awakened. He remembered Marley's ghost had warned him that he would be visited by the first spirit when the bell tolled 1. At length the hour began, and Scrooge counted the chimes.
The lights flashed up in the room. The curtains of the bed were drawn aside. Scrooge found himself face to face with a visitor.
Are you the ghost whose coming was foretold to me?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
If I may be so bold to inquire, what business has brought you here?
Your welfare.
Thank you, but I think that a good night of sleep would be best for my welfare.
Your salvation, then. Rise and walk with me.
The ghost of Christmas past led Scrooge along through the town's lighted up streets until they stopped at a certain warehouse door.
This is the place where I worked as a young man. There is old Fezziwig, my kind employer, and Dick Wilkins, who apprenticed with me.
Yo-ho, my boys! No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson. Hilly-ho! Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick! Cheer up, Ebenezer!
Fezziwig began greeting his friends one by one as they made their way into the warehouse door. First the baker with the delicious cake, followed by the milkmaid, the boy from over the way, and the girl next door. Soon came the fiddler and all the rest. It was Christmas Eve, and old Fezziwig had decided to have a Christmas ball.
Scrooge looked on, the ghost of Christmas past, and was comforted by the sounds of festivity, jolly old Fezziwig, and friendly faces of his past. When the clock struck 11, the ball began to break up, and the crowd left gaily for home.
To each and every one, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all.
Scrooge watched all this, remembering everything. Yet why was he filled with such sadness when he heard them give each a Merry Christmas as they parted for their homes? What was Merry Christmas to old Scrooge?
Out upon Merry Christmas! What good had it ever done me?
Scrooge turned upon the ghost of Christmas past and wrestled with it. He pressed on with all his might. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him.
Scrooge came to, stunned and sweating. He found himself back in his old bedroom, exhausted and confused. Scrooge lay his head upon his pillow and sank into a deep sleep.
Awakening again in the middle of a tough snore, and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1.
He got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the door, a strange voice called him by name and bade him enter.
Ebenezer Scrooge!
Come in and know me better, man.
Scrooge obeyed and opened the door. There stood a giant, glorious to see, who held high a glowing torch to shed its light upon Scrooge as he came peeking round the door.
I am the ghost of Christmas present.
Scrooge was blinded and looked away.
Look upon me.
Spirit, conduct me where you will.
Touch my robe.
Just as Scrooge held fast to the ghost of Christmas present's robe, it all vanished. The fire, the ruddy glow of the room, it all vanished.
Suddenly, the giant and Scrooge stood in the city streets on Christmas morning.
The giant went straight to the dwelling of Bob Cratchit, taking Scrooge with him, still holding fastly to his robe. On the threshold of the Cratchit's door, the spirit smiled, stopping to bless the home with the sprinkling of his torch.
Magically transported through the threshold and doorway, Scrooge saw such a hustle and bustle in the kitchen. Mrs. Cratchit, in a twice-turned gown, brave in ribbons, was preparing the Christmas dinner. The goose was roasting with the smell of sage and onion. The gravy was hissing hot, and potatoes and pudding were boiling too. Miss Cratchit was assisted by the young Cratchits, who danced and played around the table. Soon from church, Bob Cratchit entered carrying a cane, and upon his shoulders was Tiny Tim.
At last the dishes were set on the table and grace was said. It was followed by a breathless pause. But when Mrs. Cratchit had carved the goose, a murmur of delight arose all round the board. Even Tiny Tim excitedly beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!"
Oh, such a feast on Christmas Day!
On Christmas Day, indeed, a Merry Christmas to us all!
A Merry Christmas to us all! God bless us, everyone!
But the whole scene passed off with the words of Tiny Tim, and Scrooge and the spirit were again on their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited. It was a long night. The chimes were ringing 11:15 at that moment.
Almost as suddenly as his bedroom first vanished, he was transported back into the ruddy glow of his room. Scrooge looked about for the ghost and saw it not.
As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, Scrooge remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming along the ground like a mist towards him.
Ghost of the future, I fear you most. Lead on, will you not speak to me? Spirit, let us go.
The phantom moved away, and Scrooge followed him along. They came to Scrooge's counting house. Scrooge turned toward the window and looked in. It was an office, still, but not his. The furniture was not the same, and the figure in the chair was not him.
The spirit moved away, and Scrooge joined it again. They came to an iron gate, a churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went. Scrooge read upon the stone of this neglected grave his own name. Ebenezer Scrooge.
No, spirit. Oh no, hear me. I am not the man I was. This is a fearful place. Leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me, I will honor Christmas in my heart, and I will live in the past, present, and future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Heaven and Christmas be praised for this. I say it on my knees.
Holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, Scrooge saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrank, collapsed, and dwindled down into the bedpost. Shaking his head, Scrooge realized he was back in his bedroom.
He had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirit, and his face was wet with tears. Yet he heard bells ringing. Church bells! He ran to the window, opened it up, and put his head out. No fog, no mist, just clear, bright, stirring cold, a golden sunlight, a heavenly sky, such sweet, fresh air. Merry bells! It was Christmas Day. He dressed himself in all his best and got out into the streets.
He went to church and walked about. He watched people hurrying to and fro.
He patted children on the head and even questioned and talked with the beggars. He found that everything could yield him pleasure.
He had never dreamed that a walk could give him so much happiness. He became as a good friend, as a good master, and as a good man as the old city knew. His heart laughed, and that was good enough for him. It always said of him that he knew how to keep a Christmas well. May that be said of one and all of us. And as Tommy Thomas heard, God bless us, everyone.
We would like all BEEP alumni to stand up with us and sing Christmas Day.